I had the opportunity to interview my favorite yoga teacher. Dallas Delahunt is a dear friend and probably one of my favorite humans in the whole world. Her and I had a chance to chat about how she got into yoga, why she teaches the way she does, and how she takes her incredibly intentional practice off her mat into everyday living. I hope you enjoy.
Just to introduce my lovely friend Dallas, I am absolutely in love with you, and like you're one of my favorite humans on the whole planet. And I wanted to introduce you to the world, but obviously, like my audience needs to know how I came to love you and why I love the way you teach yoga, and just the fact that yoga is lovely in general, but the way you teach it and the way you approach yoga is a whole different ball game. And I would love for you to kind of like explain how you got into yoga and then why you teach the way you do.
Yeah, it's easy. I moved to Kingston in 1998, and I was like newly single, I guess, and with a couple of young kids, and didn't know the lay of the land around here. And I ended up at a it was a local gym facility, a fitness place called the Downtown Workout on Princess Street, and I can't remember exactly, like kind of around Wellington and Princess. And I just ended up in what I thought was a group fitness class. It was called yoga, but it didn't really register or mean anything to me. And a woman named Susan Sly, who owned the place, taught that class. And it was a really interesting experience because it was definitely the way that she taught it was definitely physically challenging, but I didn't have an understanding of what the shapes were, the poses were. So I went in pretty fresh, which was great. But there were a couple of things that she asked that I thought were curious and that has stuck with me ever since. And one of them was at the end when we were in Shavasana, which I didn't, realize what Shavasana was. She asked us if we could see a color and what that color was. And I was a bit taken by it because I'd always been a bit of a gym rat. And it was the first time somebody had brought that element into a group fitness class, as well as lying down on your mat and having a little rest, siesta. And immediately the color yellow just really shone bright. And I doubted it and questioned. I thought, like, how does she know I'm even seeing a color? How did I know I was seeing a color? Did that question prompt it? And where did yellow come from? It was a bit kind of like a mystery to me. And then the next day, I got in the car with my kids and drove to Guelph to visit my sister. And I just remember my whole body, like, not feeling like it did prior to, in a way that, there were aspects of it that were certainly uncomfortable in my body. It was a long drive to do right after such a physical class that was physical in a way that I had never experienced before. And it just never left my mental space and experience. So then I started doing that. Well, and then the downtown workout, I showed up one day for another one of these classes, and there was a big fat sign on the door. It had closed, unbeknownst to anybody. I know. For whatever reason, I don't know, and it's not important. So then I just started doing some of those moves, like anything I could remember on my own. So it became more of it wasn't a practice, but it was, at least I didn't view it that way. It was just some simple movements I would do in my living room after I put my kids to bed or in the morning. There was no routine to it, if you will. And then I think maybe in 2001, I went to Path Yoga, which was one of the only studios in Kingston at that time. It was an Ashtanga studio. And I did their 6-week Ashtanga, intro course. And then I just took that into, again, on my mat in my house. I think that's when I got my first yoga mat, actually. And it was like the most expensive yoga mat. Oh my God, the one that I got from them. I think it was like similar to a Manduka, but not Manduka name. And then I just developed into my own personal practice and all of it. I've never been a studio practitioner. I mean, I'll go to studios from time to time. It's not my preference. I do like to, when I travel, to experience other teachers or teachers I followed with or have trained with. And going somewhere where you're not known and practicing is also really a real treat for sure for me. And
Yeah,
so,
because you're kind of like a celebrity in Kingston now. Like
well, that's
everybody,
okay. Yeah, that's what people want to. But I'm actually quite removed from Kingston teaching now, and I have been for a few years. So I imagine that celebrity status has diminished, which is hey, okay, whatever. It's funny the projections people put on you. Yeah, so it was like, I guess that's it. It was really, a personal practice that ebbed and flowed. And then in 2000 and let me think, 2005, I think it was, I had a pretty big abdominal surgery that I thought was going to, cure whatever it was that I was going through at the time. And it didn't. It kind of wreaked havoc on me emotionally, really, like in ways that I was blindsided by. And it brought me to my mat more. And it brought me to my first yoga retreat, which was really great because it was an entire weekend where I felt completely and utterly comfortable and at ease in my body after this experience that manifested into an emotional roller coaster. And at that yoga retreat, I learned that the owners did a teacher training at a retreat center that was close to them. And this gentleman, Glenn Misford at Still Point, did a yoga teacher training over the course of 12 months. It was 1 weekend a month in a retreat-like setting. And I thought, perfect, sign me right up, because that's what I needed. I just needed to be somewhere retreating for, I also had young teenagers at the time. And I didn't go for the teacher training aspect of it. I didn't really even understand what that was or what it meant. I went to completely retreat 1 week in a month. And then what I learned from that was, I was there with, I think maybe 22, 23 other people. And it was really cathartic. It was a really strong community that we built. And then I respected the element of it being a teacher training, and I participated and I showed up. And then, that went on for a year. And in that teacher training, in that time, a year later from my first abdominal surgery, I got quite ill and I had a bowel obstruction that started when I was actually there at Still Point for one of the weekends. Ended up in emergency abdominal surgery to, make sure I stayed this side of the earth. And it kind of spiraled me deeper into my practice, Without any intention of teaching, I used to go to a studio in Kingston to take class every Saturday at noon. And so I would have finished that course in August. And then that October, when I was in one of these classes, the teacher didn't show up. And there were a couple people there that I knew-ish that knew I had done this teacher training, so asked me to teach that class, which, in the moment it was a fast, quick hell no. It made no sense to me. I didn't think I retained any information from the teacher training because it wasn't why I took it. And anyway, long story short, in those few moments, I thought, like, how is this even possible that I'm the only one qualified to teach this class? Who are these people? What am I going to teach? And how am I? Like, I have no idea. But I guess because of, my personality, I thought, how could I not either, right? Like, we all took our time out to be here. So I jumped in. To this day, I have absolutely zero recollection of it. There was one person in that class that I don't know any longer, but I knew for a long time that did not enjoy it and made it clear. And then several years later, as I continued teaching, came to my classes very often. There was I think it was, you get that resistance when you show up for someone's class and that someone isn't there to teach it. And you'd like to book it, but, for the sake of embarrassment or what have you, people tend to stay. But there was a moment in that experience that, although I don't remember what I taught, I remember how I felt. And how I felt was that this was it. This was something that kind of soothed another piece of me. I remember going back, thinking back to high school years and how I wanted to be a school teacher. for many reasons, things got off course. I had kids really young. That didn't, and then I realized in this moment is, you know, it doesn't have to be a classroom setting in the sense of, you know, desks in a row, pencils in hands, people sitting, you know, doing busy work. This was it. This was my classroom. And so the woman who was to teach that class that didn't show up that day for whatever reason, 3 weeks later opened up a studio of her own in the West End of Kingston and invited me to teach there. And then that just spiraled from there and continued the teaching journey.
And then when I met you, you had your own studio. So I'm so curious how it kind of spiraled into from you teaching at, I'm assuming, Jamie's studio?
That's SMAPA, yeah.
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 So how did you go from teaching at Jamie's studio to opening your own studio, and like what kind of sparked, like why did you want to have your own space?
Interesting. I didn't really. You know, it's not what I had aspired to. I taught at SMAPA, the West End location, and then moved more toward downtown when that one opened for about 3 years, maybe, if memory serves me, like somewhere, let's say between 2 and 3 years. And, you know, as many things, there were aspects of like the business part of it that it's always hard to grapple as a yoga teacher with the business aspect of it. And we just had different ideas and different visions. And there were areas that I didn't feel I aligned in a way that I could best show up there and show up in a way where people would get the best of me. And there were no other studios in town. Like there was Feel Yoga, but I'm not a Bikram teacher. I'm not a hot yoga teacher, right? There was Path Yoga, and I'm not an Ashtanga teacher. And I thought about it, but then I also had a woman who used to take my classes one day mentioned it to me, kind of sparked that interest of perhaps, you know, owning a studio together or what have you. And it's like I'm vaguely remembering some of the details as well, because it was some time ago. It was in December of 2008, when my business partner at the time, Julie Holmes, and I decided to open up Studio 330. So we decided in December. We opened in February on Valentine's Day of 2009. And then Julie and I were business partners for just under 2 years before she decided it actually wasn't, you know, what she wanted to do any longer. And she wasn't a yoga teacher either. So we balanced each other out, and I became the face of the studio, if you will, owning it and teaching a bulk of the classes. And then Julie did the support work in other teachers and energy exchangers and the laundry of the studio, the behind the scenes things too that nobody ever seems to pay attention to or know about a lot of the time. Yeah.
Magical fairies, just do it.
Yeah, from the front of the house experience, if you will, right? Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm so glad you did, because that's where I met you. Years later, I think it was in 2016 when I finally decided to like come to one of your classes, be at the studio. And I vividly remember the first class and just sitting there being like, this is what yoga should be like, you know? And I had already done a yoga teacher's training. I'd been doing yoga at the gym. Like you said, like I was a gym rat too. So I was very much in the gym atmosphere of doing yoga. Like at Good Life, they called it flow or body flow, something like that. And then there was also like a yoga teacher that did her yoga classes, but it was still very like anatomical and science-based, which I loved, but there was just something disconnecting between like the anatomical side and the science side of things, and then other classes where they were almost like ethereal. Like the woman's like, you know, something about your lotus flower and reach up to your fifth star. And I was just like, what the heck is this bitch talking about? You know, like there was a huge disconnect. You were either on the one side where it's like super science-based and super anatomical, or that really like hippie, ethereal, like weird stuff where you're just like, I can't do this. But then I sat in your class and I didn't fight to look at the teacher because you were behind us. and guiding every step of the way. And it wasn't about like how fluid you were in Sanskrit. You didn't have to be a member of Cirque du Soleil. You didn't have to be vegan. You didn't have to be any of those things that a lot of people think of when they think of yoga. And I also loved that it wasn't one of the very specific lineages, like you said, like Bikram or Ashtanga, or it didn't feel like it was rigid. And I think it was one of those moments where I felt like I was actually able to be in my body as opposed to paying attention to the teacher. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like I find most yoga classes, you're watching the teacher and trying to mimic the teacher and the pose that they're in rather than listening to a voice tell you how your body should feel in this stretch or in this pose. And I just sat there being like, oh, thank God, like, this is what yoga should be. And from that moment on, I was just like, I will follow this woman anywhere. Like, I love her. And then I got to know you more, and you embody the whole thing. Like, just the way you are in life, the way you carry yourself, the way you speak to people, the way, like, I absolutely adore you. If that hasn't been obvious, I absolutely adore you. But I also love that you're so humble about it. Like you're so grounded because it's always about like learning the next thing and it's not even about yoga. It's just about life. And I also love that you brought life into your yoga classes. Like you made it very much like you always ended with like a quote, or you talked about that sort of like aspect of making sure that it wasn't just about this moment, that you were going to bring this moment into your life. And I would love to kind of like have you speak on that of like like why do you bring real life into yoga, and why do you bring yoga into real life, and how those kind of go hand in hand, and why I believe it absolutely should. But what's also been your experience with, like, you know, like you said, you've been to other classes and taught like with other teachers. So what do you not love about it, and what do you love about that aspect too?
There are so many jumping off points in that. We will be here for the next week, so I'll try and distill it. One of the last questions you asked was, you know, how do you bring yoga into life and life into yoga? And I would suggest that there's no separation. So it's impossible for it to be, for me, either or. And I would say that yoga, my understanding of it is it's not the what you're doing, it's not the posture you're doing, or you know, whether you can fold into a pretzel or become Cirque du Soleil or be strong enough to stand upside down. It's the quality in which you do what you do. So then it's a quality that I aspire to bring to everything that it is that I do, whether it's in this conversation, or earlier it was, you know, making my breakfast or having a conversation with my 13-year-old before I took him to school, or the drive to school, right? It's in all of those pieces, and it's also not perfect. So it's a commitment I make every day I wake up, that I'm going to be about 87% less asshole than I was maybe yesterday, and really focus on my understanding of the quality of yoga and how it is my life. And so that helps it, because it's a consistency, you know, and I really like consistency. And it's a deeper understanding. So it, you know, I reflect on my core values. I have 3 of them that I filter into my life. And then I look at the choices that I have to make, or the things that I have to do, and how they align with one of my values. And if they do, then great. If not, you know, I hope that I can course correct to some degree. And again, not perfect. So I bring all of it together as just a commitment every day. And it's a, you know, I mean, maybe it's cliche to say, but it's a lifestyle. It's a life practice. It's It's a way of being. And when I did my teacher training, I never felt like we were particularly taught how to teach. I feel like we were privy to someone's practice. And then we were taught posture clinics and, the benefits, the contraindications, the alignment of, for sure. But then how to deliver that and how to teach it was a missing element to me. And so it was easy to kind of copy what we saw and what we participated in, which was challenging, and it didn't matter to me. Like, I showed up respectfully, but there was no pass or fail for me that was going to, what I thought, affect what I was doing, because I wasn't going to be a yoga teacher. So I could go through the experience of teaching and not be attached to whether I messed up or not, And then when I started teaching, I first started teaching at Field Yoga in this, what they called the stone room, because it was a room with stone walls. The one interesting thing about that room was it was freezing in the winter. So I started teaching there, let's say, end of October of 2006, I think it was. And I did 2 classes a week, a Thursday evening and a Saturday noon. And sometimes it was bloody cold in there. So I would go through, I would begin class going through sun salutations with students, because I also needed to warm up. It was insanely cold. And the heaters were okay, but they were limited. So, but then what I noticed is I would be taking a little bit of time to warm my body up, but then I would be so distracted by what I was seeing and where I could best support students. So then I was called to go do that. But I was called to go do that more than anything else. So then it forced me off my mat to teach verbally. And I could never stick to any one lineage. One, if they had any rule structure to it, it was like, if I had to teach an Ashtanga class that's supposed to last 90 minutes, that would take me, 13 hours probably. Yeah. Because of not to say they don't spend time and attention doing things, but in the way that I do it, I just couldn't keep up with that if I saw something different going on. So I quickly became, let me think about it. I quickly began noticing more about who was in front of me and less about having a class plan. So I've never had a class plan. I don't even know if I would know what to do with one. But what I do understand is that there's a blueprint. I understand that there are ways that our body moves. Our spine moves in 6 different ways, and there is a life cycle to a class, right? We end in Shavasana, which is corpse pose, for a reason. So then we must begin at the birth cycle of it. So each class has this life cycle. So I focus on making sure that I cover a life cycle in class. The spine moves in 6 different ways, and that's my blueprint. But then I have to deliver that to the people that are showing up in front of me. And I would say I've got strong observational skills, because I'm in your face all the time and I'm paying this close attention. So I'm watching everything in front of me. I also have the ability to remember conversations verbatim. So if a student were to give me information about them and their body and their ailments, what have you, then I also have this information in me as I'm delivering the class. So oftentimes people can feel like it's such a personal experience. And I think because I teach verbally only, you'll often find me at the back of the room in observation, but also to remove me as an external distraction. But I'd say my experience with that is I've been able to really refine my cueing and my verbal skills so that they're simple to follow, as simple as possible to follow. And if my eyes are on students, I can see where my words aren't landing so that I can work on my language skills. essentially, right? And work on being economical with my words so that there's clear instruction for them to go, oh, okay, right foot goes here, left hand goes there. Perfect. But then there's space in between the cue and students getting their body into that shape and then having a moment to land there where I don't feel the need to constantly talk, and I'm okay holding quiet space, which I think is really important for people to be in their experience, because it is personal. It is about them. It's not about me. My goal is always to be able to guide a class where people could just close their eyes throughout, so they could release all external reinforcements. So, some of the reasons I teach verbally are, like, first and foremost, I think what I've learned over the years is it's not my practice. It's my teaching practice, perhaps, but it's not my physical practice. So if I'm doing the yoga as I'm verbally instructing the yoga, I'm not right in my body in a way that I would like to have an experience where I'm not going to injure my body, right? So first and foremost, to take care of myself, because it's hard to show up and guide if I can't do that. And then also, there are enough external reinforcements in the world, I think, that tell us what we should look like, how we should move, the things that we should put on our body, whether it be clothing, makeup, aesthetics, what have you. Like we're bombarded by the external, that it's nice to have to strengthen that internal reinforcement and understand your body in space, right? That that you have a right foot, and that where it goes at the top of the mat based on your understanding and your proprioception and your listening skills and your honing into having an inward experience, rather than kinking your neck, looking to me. Is that her right foot? Is that her left foot? Did she mirror me? Because I couldn't mirror anybody. It's so tragic.
It's so hard.
Yeah, I really like to separate myself. And it's interesting because over the years, things come up. Many, many years ago, I used to do a lot of partner yoga. I broke a baby toe in that. And then, not that I couldn't teach a physical class with a broken baby toe, but it does add a limitation to it. So then whatever limits me physically is then going to limit what I deliver, and it's going to limit what they experience, right? And this past year, I broke my wrist, I had surgery, there was no downward dog happening to me with me for quite a while. So then that would also limit my ability to be able to teach if I'm only doing it physically,
Yeah.
Yeah, so it allows me to show up, I think, in a way that best supports students having a personal experience within a public setting. And then, speaking to not following a specific lineage, I have never had I don't know how I know this, you sometimes just know, and you believe that and then you follow it, and then maybe we call it intuition. But I've never looked outside of me for a guru. And so I've never had a teacher. I've had many, many teachers and many, many experiences, but I've always understood, even before yoga, from a very early age, that I'm my own boss. I'm my own guru. I'm like, everything that I need is here. It's not always easy to remember. Don't get me wrong. I'm not, infallible by any means. But I've always looked to tune inward. Sometimes I use an external measure. You've been to my home. I've got mirrors around a lot, and I use that, but it's a long story that's not going to bore everybody to death. But it is sometimes when I go in looking for that reflection, and I, have an internal dialogue and internal questions, but I'm always looking to go in. For many reasons. And I think in that, what I've been able to do is I've been able to kind of, tease out the things that really resonate for me and with me from other teachers and experiences and trainings and courses, that then, I take it in, I bring it in part of my personal practice, and what I remember physically, I do. And then when I practice that, I'm able to integrate it. And then as that integration process happens, I'm able to deliver it where you'll see sprinklings of certain teachers maybe in my teaching, but you'll hear it come out authentically with the way that I choose to string words together. So it may sound familiar, but you probably won't be able to pinpoint going, oh, I know that was, Sean Corrin saying that, or Brian Kess saying this, or David Regland saying, so I think it's been important to me that I'm not only delivering somebody else's message. Like, I'm not a channel for another teacher, I'm a channel more for how source moves through me while taking on experiences of this physical lived moment that I have in time.
I think that was one of the main things that really I could almost feel the moment I saw you step into the room, was that it's that confidence that's not arrogant. You know what I mean? Like, you just had that, like, I am my own boss sort of air about you that I was just like mesmerized. And then all of a sudden you disappeared at the back of the room and I was like, what's happening? So it was just like, I was mesmerized by you, like, from the moment I saw you. And you do carry yourself, and that's why I said in earlier about the way you carry yourself. It's very confident without, like, while also being humble. You know what I mean? Like, you're very sure of yourself, but also still learning every day. And I love that about you. And I love that you bring that into your classes. And it's very evident that you almost give permission, if you will, to be here now, and don't worry about how your body was yesterday or how it's going to be tomorrow, or, you know what I mean? Because every day is different. So every downward dog is going to be different. Maybe you're tight today, maybe you're not tight today. Like, I love that you gave that permission, so to speak. And you just, like, allowed your body to be how it is, as opposed to, this is what that pose is supposed to look like, and this is what I want it to look like. And like, you didn't have that rigid sort of expectation, if you will, about the class or the pose or the flow of it all. And I find that's kind of speaking to the point of, like, your classes aren't your practice. I do find that's what most people, in terms of, like, my experience with other teachers, that's what I find they struggle with, is they're trying to make that class part of their practice. And then they're also, so you can't be present in your practice, but then you also can't be present with the class because you're trying to be present in your practice. So I find it's almost disconnecting, and it feels very external. It feels very like a weird expectation of, I should look like that, or it should be something that it's just non-existent in your classes. It's just non-existent in your presence. And I love that about you, that you don't also change the way you are outside of class versus, you know what I mean? Like, you're just you, and I love you so much. I just love that about you.
I know what you mean there. It's a blessing and a curse, that's for sure. I would say I can't speak for other teachers. I mean, I do know the lay of the land for sure. And that is, most teacher trainings teach people how to teach by doing the practice.
Yeah.
There's not a strong focus on verbal cueing. At least, I mean, maybe things have changed, but it was never what I experienced, and I shouldn't say never, but the majority of the time, absolutely, I did not experience that. So, I would give teachers the benefit of the doubt in that way, for sure. And then there's no one encouraging, perhaps. I mean, I have had so many conversations about teaching verbally with teachers. It's like nauseating. And I can remember, new teachers, let's say, well, it doesn't even have to be a new teacher, but teachers coming to me looking to teach at the studio. And that was one of the requirements of teaching at the studio. And we worked together as a team on that. And I remember it shifted because not all of the teachers at 330 taught verbally. And it shifted a day that I went to. I used to do a lot of assisting of this teacher in California, Sean Korn, and she did this class in Minneapolis, or this 5-day training in Minneapolis. And I was there with her, not Minneapolis, Minnesota. Who cares? Minnesota, Minneapolis, the location's irrelevant.
Somewhere.
Anyway, I was there for 5 days with her on that. And then while I was there, she had told me to take a class with Matthew Stanford. And he is a paraplegic. He was in a car accident when he was 10, so has no feeling from the waist down and is in a wheelchair. And he taught Iyengar yoga. And Iyengar yoga is like the most specific, refined. I mean, in the one class we did with him, or I did with him that day, it was a 90-minute class that focused on literally this spot here and the connection to the sole of your foot. So we fine-tuned it, and it was just one pose that we did. And it was shoulder stand. And what I noticed most about him was he came in, he had in the studio, there was a garage door. He came in through the garage door in his wheelchair. His wheelchair rolled over our mats, leaving tire marks. He taught the entire class, which is like Iyengar yoga is probably the most, in my opinion, refined and fine-tuned to the most minute, like right there, that one little spot, right? Detail that this man taught verbally only. And I came out of it thinking, sweet shit. You know, almost like thus far, no further. We all be going to verbal teaching without also wanting to like, you know, tell teachers how to teach. But at the same time, there's an experience to it that is so profound that if we're going to look at a studio as a you know, like this an umbrella and this experience that when you go into 330, this is what you get as an experience. And then we each offer it in our own personal way because we're all so, you know, unique. The other thing that I found interesting is, I mean, you know, Studio 330 used to get so busy and you'd be hard pressed to be able to walk in between yoga mats, right? But sometimes people would be very protective of their space and it's sacred space and you can't walk on my mat and you can't do this and they tiptoe around and you know, I don't want to diminish that experience for them, but when I saw Matthew unapologetically just going over our mats in a wheelchair, I thought, okay, like, you know, for the love of God, we can get over ourselves to some degree. So I had a meeting with the teachers at 3:30 and I just said, you know, I explained why I thought this was important. And can we choose a date that we will begin 100% verbal teaching? Can we roll up the yoga teacher, like the teacher's yoga mat? So it's not even there as a default. So what's the date we're going to roll the mat up? What's the date that we're only going to teach verbally? And then what are the supports we can put in place together as a team to get us there? And you know, they blew me away. There was no date. They were like, right now. Right now. And I was shocked because there's fear involved in it. You know, it's not easy. It's not, although it's what I do all the time, and it's pretty much the only way I've done it, it doesn't mean it's always easy. You know, because then I have to fumble through it face on. I can't hide it in you know, if I go into downward dog, I can really close in, or tortoise pose, whatever, right? And so then we worked on it. We worked as a team. We would do, you know, practice classes together. Sometimes we would record them audibly or like an audio recording and then have to go home and take it so that we could hear our teaching. We could hear the way that we cue, and then we can work on refining it, because you don't always know, right? You need that feedback, whether it's recording your class or you have somebody else there lovingly along the way. And I would say that there was something else that you said that caught my attention, in that, you know, there are a few things that I always think about, and the more I the more years that pass, the more experience I have, the more I would say that having this title of a yoga teacher is, I use it still. I still, you know, say I'm a yoga teacher because it's easy and people understand that language. But I don't think that that's what I do. I think that I'm somebody who helps remind you of what you already know. And we just need those reminders. We just need some help teasing it out, because the chaos or the stress and the noise in our personal lives just dampens it to a point where we can no longer hear it or feel it or know it. So the reason the things that I say resonate for people is because they already know it. And I'm not saying anything that I don't experience or need to hear myself, because, you know, I understand we're more alike than we are unalike. And I really subscribe to teaching it to meet people where they're at, so that, you know, every day I assume everybody's a beginner in this, because, you know, I haven't been in my body before this moment in time ever. So I can't assume my body's going to do right now what it did yesterday. You know, there's not one pose that's for everybody. Not one. Like, we could look at child's pose. I mean, arrogantly, we will send a student there if they want to opt out of downward dog. How, like, sometimes I think that's the most arrogant I can say. So I have to watch and use words appropriately. That downward dog's not for you today or for your body today, then don't do it. You know, you could choose child's pose. You could choose table pose as a replacement, you know, or anything, but those are easy if we use them for transition postures, let's say. But, you know, what if you're not feeling the strength for downward dog today and you have a bum knee? How dare I tell you to go to child's pose if that's the resting position? You know, who am I to say that there's one pose for everybody? You know, somebody could have a bum knee and then turn upside down on their hands and hold handstand, no problem. You know, but does that mean that handstand there is for everybody? So I do like to think of it as a clean slate. I do. And I also don't like, I also want to work at getting over myself, in that I don't expect anybody to remember anything that I say, which is why I say the same thing a lot of the, like the opening of my class, the ending of my class. You'll know you've landed there to some degree, but then so many times students will say, you know, that they heard this for the first time. They've never heard me say that before. They like that I sprinkled it in. I think, oh, every single class I ever teach. but it just highlights where they are in their life in those moments, and maybe they can't always be present to it, or maybe there was a shift that allowed them to be more present to it in this moment.
Yeah.
But I don't think that we're beyond a beginner.
Yeah. I love that. And there's often, that reminded me of the phrase of like, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? So you suddenly say something that you've said a million times, but they are open and able to hear it in that moment because they were ready. Yeah. And I know I really appreciate you taking the time with me, and I know we were going to chat more about like gardening and stuff like that, but I also want to maybe weave it in because I feel like it fits, because it's just how you live life. And I would love for you to kind of speak on what your garden has taught you about yoga or life or any of that, because you have recently started to grow your own food. So excited. And yeah, I would love to, because like I said, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and suddenly you're starting to garden. So I would love to know what you as a student have learned in your garden.
Oh gosh, again, we'll be here forever. So this is my third year gardening, but because we moved to the country, the garden beds got really big, you know, whereas when I lived in the city, they were, you know, pretty, you know, Pinterest looking raised beds kind of thing. You know, what I'm most proud about of my gardening is I absolutely decided that I was going to be of even mind. And that was the piece of my yoga practice, you know, again, that I really wanted to hone in on. And so, because people have a lot to offer, right? A lot of people tell you what you should plant beside, you know what, and then somebody will tell you, no, that's all wrong, or plant before the full moon, or don't, because it's just mind messing, right? Do your rows north to south. No, how about east to west? How about your property goes downhill this way? So you should take that into consideration. And it's just too much. It's just too much. And, you know, people talk about tilling versus non, you know, or weeding and the grumbling of weeding. So it was just, my practice was to be of even mind. And for me, that means to not prefer one over the other. And it wasn't easy. Well, you know what? I would say it was easier than I thought, to be honest. When I went out to weed, I weeded. And when I went out to, and every day I went out and I watched the garden and I looked and I asked it questions and I wanted it to show me. Well, what do I know? I've never been a potato growing. I have no idea, right? But I knew that there'd be signs, and and then you would just notice, like, oh, this one needs some water today. This one needs some weeding today. And then I would do that. But I didn't want to make it difficult for myself, which then would put that energy into the food that I was growing for my family. So I accepted weeding was it. Or how about hand watering? Yeah, you know, taking it out of the rain barrel. And then when there wasn't enough water in the rain barrel, and then one day I realized, like, oh, I can't use my well water because I know that at one point anyway, it was full of E. coli and other coliform, which is why I put in an extensive filtration system in our house, but it's not filtered out to the garden. So then I thought, okay, well, now what am I going to do? So I would fill my rain barrel up with my well water. I learned the measurement of chlorine that you have to put in that, which is so small. It's a teaspoon. And then I would let it sit. And then I took it and took it to the city and got it tested. And it had no bacteria in it. So I thought, great. And then I learned that the chlorine, from as best as I can understand, people can chime in differently, is pretty negligible in watering your garden in comparison to E. coli or in comparison to a water softener. So then I would water by hand, and I would harvest when needed. I would say I definitely enjoy growing potatoes more than tomatoes. And I don't want to begrudge my tomatoes by any means. I'm happy tomato season is over and I'll harvest it and but from that I thought, okay, so the tomatoes aren't as comfortable for me. What am I going to learn from it so that next year it will be more comfortable, right? So I learned really quickly to make my arms really itchy and uncomfortable. So then put gloves on, less discomfort, and then I'm able to be more present to my tomatoes. So that was a really, really strong focus of mine, and I think I did a pretty good job. Like I did have this one day. The tomatoes overwhelmed me. Like we grew so many. I think we had about 120 tomato plants, right? I mean, it was obscene. And I was learning. So I remember one day I had a bath, and I got out of the bath. And you know, you can have that like real magnesium, you know, high from a bath and feel like we're drunk. So I'm lying on the bathroom floor, butt naked, super overheated, on my towel, and I holler at my fellow Landon to come in and help me. So all I want to do is talk about tomatoes, and I'm bawling my eyes out, and he's looking at me going, so we're lying here today naked just to cry about tomatoes. Like yeah, they've got the best of me right now, but you know, I needed a release. because it did get overwhelming, right? But I had to like so humble and crying, you know, about it in a very vulnerable way, to then go back out and tend to the tomatoes that needed my time and attention, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's the one thing that he's really brought to it for me. Well, he's done many things, but that was the thing. It's like everything just needs time and attention, you know. And what that attention is and how much time, he could never tell me, and that's where I get frustrated, because my Virgo linear brain just wants just tell me how many rows, how many times am I watering it, when am I, and he's like just not the way gardens work, you know, that's not the way Mother Nature is going to work in this. And so yeah, there's just time and attention like anything, you know. And I have some photos of my garden, but many of them I've had to, I don't like to bring my phone out there with me. So I would say about 98.3% of the time, my phone's never with me. You know, there's sometimes where I've had to go in the house for a break. I'm like, oh, I'm going to take it out, take a photo of this. Landon takes a lot of all of the great photos are his work that he sets up for like a photo kind of experience. Or some days, you know, I'll holler at Jack to, you know, take a photo, because I think like, I mean, I want those mementos too, and I want to brag about it a little bit on my social media because I think it's hysterical, and you know, but at the same time, like anything else, like when I'm sitting here having this conversation with you, or when I'm sitting down with Jack, or we sit down for a family meal, I don't want my phone around. So I wasn't going to bring that into my gardening either.
Yeah.
No.
And I think that's what I was kind of going on, was like the way you do yoga is the way you do life. And I love that you let your garden, like you would ask your garden, like, what do you need today? Just like the way you would like check with your students, what do they need today? And how can I kind of help like show up and assist them with what they need? And it wasn't about you, and it wasn't about what you wanted and how you wanted to do it. It was, you can't do that with Mother Nature. Like your tomatoes will not, like, they'll be like, no. Just the way a student would be like, no, I'm not doing this today, you know. So I love that kind of tied in.
Yeah. And it's the same. It's kind of, you know, like even in parenting, Landon and I have been talking about it a lot lately, where we're like bumper pads, you know. So there's a general blueprint for a yoga class, and you know, a life cycle, and there's a life cycle to growing a tomato plant, right? And that, so yeah, as you know, there's a combination of things, because yes, it is Mother Nature, and it is going to unfold the way it is, and there is a linear approach to it as well, because I planted those damn things in the ground. They didn't just show up, right? But it's taking the time to tend to them, to plant them for the best success, and then to see how they show up and tend to it in that way. So in a yoga class, I would, you know, offer a sequence of postures, and you know, like I'm planting the seeds, and then I watch the expressions and how the students show up, so then I can tend to it as I'm guiding through. Same, you know. And now with Jack, you know, 13 and a half, it's the same. It's, you know, we've planted all the seeds. Like I don't have to teach him a single thing for the rest of his life. There's nothing left to teach him.
Yeah, I love the way you said it.
To show him there's, you know, he now just needs our guidance. He already knows, like, you know, this kid will almost never wear a winter coat, but he knows how to prepare himself for inclement weather, you know, how weather might change through a school day, for example. And then he makes his choices, but he learns and grows. He'll never hear me say, oh, you better bring that. No, you know, the seeds have already been planted. And now there's a way that he's going to express himself. And then there's a little bit of guidance, a little bit of bumpering when he needs that added support or help in learning self-governance, what have you, right? Or, yeah, it is. It's like, that's why it's not yoga and living life.
Yeah.
To me. It's impossible to,
yeah,
you know, the word, it means to yoke or a union, right? So it's hard to separate all of that.
Yeah.
So
and I will say that even just listening to you in your yoga classes has made me assess and alter the way I show up in life. The way I speak to my dogs even has changed just because of the way you live life and the way you teach yoga. And I don't think I could be more grateful to you. I love you so much. Literally one of my favorite humans on the whole planet. And I really appreciate you taking this time to even express the way that you teach yoga to everyone else. If anyone's listening, like if you have a chance to go to one of Dallas's class, absolutely jump all over it, because she will literally, speaking from experience, will change your life. So I really appreciate you, darling. Thank you so much for taking this time with me. I'm so grateful
welcome.
for you. For you teaching yoga and for you as a human. The world is a better place with you in it.
And for everyone in it, for sure. We're all here just helping each other along the way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, lovely. And I will see you again soon. Say hi to Jack for me. And enjoy your garden.
I will.
Awesome. Mwah.